Hello dear students and welcome to Genesis. Well, आज we are going to continue the chapter pollination and fertilization. लेकिन आज हम लोग पढ़ने वाले हैं about various agents of cross pollination. Now you already know that cross pollination में there are two different plants involved, and there will be transfer of pollen grain from the anther of one flower on one plant to the stigma of another flower borne on another plant. अगर doubt है then definitely check my video on this topic. Now जब हम agents की बात करते हैं, depending upon the various kind of agents that are used, हमने देखा है कि इन plants में there are certain modifications seen in their flowers. So आज के इस वीडियो के बाद probably you will be even able to identify the agent of a flower by just looking at it. Flower के features को देख के आप guess कर सकते हैं कि वो insect से pollinated है या wind से है या किसी large animal से है. So now on the basis of the agent, pollinations are of different type and different type of pollination के different flowers होते हैं. उनके लिए अलग names use किए जाते हैं. जैसे number one agent जो मैंने यहाँ लिखा है, they are insects. अगर कोई फ्लावर इंसेक्ट से पॉलिनेटेड है तो उस फ्लावर को हम कहते हैं एंटेमोफिलस फ्लावर एंड एंटेमोफिली इज द काइंड ऑफ पॉलिनेशन शोन बाय देम. इसके एग्जांपल्स हैं डालिया एंड स्वीट पी. द सेकंड वन इज विंड. अगर विंड से पॉलिनेटेड है देन द फ्लावर विल बी कॉल्ड एनिमोफिलस एंड इसका एग्जांपल है मेज एंड इस पॉलिनेशन को कहा जाएगा एनिमोफिली. Next is water. If the agent is water, then it is a hydrophilous flower and the pollination is hydrophily, जिसके example हैं Vallisneria. Then the fourth one, if pollinated by birds, then the flower will be called Ornithophilous flower. Pollination के type को कहा जाएगा Ornithophily and इसके दो examples हैं Bignonia and Kana. And the last one is where a large animal like elephant will perform the work of an agent for pollination, और इसको कहा जाता है Elephophilous flower and उस pollination को कहा जाता है Elephophily, जिसका example है Rafflesia. They are huge, बहुत बड़े flowers होते हैं, they are big in size and they are pollinated by elephants. अब हम धीरे धीरे हर एक type of pollination को details में समझेंगे. Let us start with entemophilous flowers. Entemophilous, that means the pollinating agents are insects. So in this, the flower is going to show modifications which will help the flower to attract pollinating agents like different insects. So in this, the flowers are going to be large so that they are well seen, and if they are small in size, then they will be in cluster. They are definitely going to be brightly colored so that the insects can obviously see them. Some of them will also produce scent or nectar. So these are some of the characteristic features of such flowers. So if they are brightly colored, if they are large, or if they are small, they are in cluster, if they produce scent, if they produce nectar, then we can make a guess that it is an entemophilous flower. Now let's talk about the pollen grains. The pollen grains are definitely going to be sticky, so that they can stick to the insects and can be carried from one place to another. They can also be spiny. Then the stigma of such flowers definitely will be sticky, so that whenever they find insects sitting on them, they can easily allow the pollen grains to stick to them. One more thing, the stigma of such flowers usually remain within the flower and they don't hang out of the flower, because they do not have to wait for the wind to carry the pollen grains to them. The insects will anyways come and sit on the flower and thereby shed the pollen grains on the stigma. Next we have anemophilous flowers. That means these flowers are pollinated by wind. The pollinating agent is wind, as a result of which this flower will not have to make itself attractive to attract any pollinating agent. They can afford to be less attractive, but here the number of pollen grains that are produced are way higher compared to any entemophilous flower, because there are chances of loss of pollen grains when they are carried by wind from one flower on one plant to another flower. So let's quickly understand this. The flowers here, they can be small, they are less brightly colored, they will not produce any scent or no nectar. Now what about the pollen grains? The pollen grains, we know that the pollen grains, they are present inside the anther and the anther remains attached to the filament, but in this case the anthers will remain loosely attached to the filament. Why? Because this will help the pollen grains to shed easily along with the wind. That means the anther will remain loosely attached to the filament, will help the anther to release the pollen grain in the wind. Now what about the pollen grains? Are they going to be sticky? Are they going to be spiny? Number one, the pollen grains, they are going to be light, they will be smooth. That means they will not be sticky, they will not be spiny, and they are going to be dry. so that they can be easily carried along with the wind. What about the stamen, the male part? The stamen will always hang out of the flower, and it is going to be long. So in this case, the male part of the flower will actually hang out of the flower, or it will remain out of the flower, so that it can always come in contact with the wind. The last part is the stigma. The stigma is also going to be long, and it will be feathery. So these are the characteristic features of a flower that will be pollinated by wind, and they are also known as anemophilous flower. Hydrophilous flower. These flowers are pollinated by water. So basically they are aquatic plants. So in these we have seen that the flowers, they are mostly seen to float on the surface of the water, especially in cases like Vallisneria, where the male flower floats on surface of water until they meet a female flower. What about pollen grains? They are produced in large quantities. Another interesting thing about their pollen grains will have specific gravity equal to that of water. Now, why? This will help them to float and remain just below the surface of water. This is the reason why their specific gravity has to be equal to that of water. Now, after this, there are two more flowers that are mentioned in our syllabus. One is where the flower is pollinated by birds, known as Ornithophily. We do not have to learn anything about these flowers, just the examples. The examples are Bignonia and Canna. And the other one where the flower gets pollinated by elephant, and the example of which is Rafflesia. Rafflesia, they are very large flowers, and when elephant walks over these flowers, they trample them. But while doing that, the pollen grains, they get stuck to the feet of the elephant, and it moves from one flower to another flower. It helps in transferring the pollen grain. Now let us understand what is artificial pollination. Well, artificial pollination is a practice where we transfer pollen grain from the male part of a flower onto the stigma of another flower. Now this practice is an age-old practice, and this is usually used by florists, where we want a particular desired type of flower to be grown. So in that case, we ensure that the pollen grain of the flower that we want settles on the stigma of another flower. So in this, there are 3 steps to be followed. The number 1 step is where you remove the anther of a flower. Imagine this is the anther of a flower, and here is the filament. So you're going to remove the anther of this flower. Why are you doing this? Because if it is a bisexual flower, we do not want the pollen grain of the same flower to settle on the stigma of the flower. So in that case, the first step is emasculation. Once we perform emasculation, then we try to cover the flower with a bag. This is known as bagging. Again, why are we doing this? Because we again do not want any pollen grain, any wild pollen grain, or even of nearby flowers to come and settle on the flower that we want to pollinate. And the third step is where we perform pollination, or which is also known as artificial pollination. So in this, we basically sprinkle the pollen grain on the stigma of this flower. So there were 3 steps. First is emasculation, second bagging, and third is the pollination, where we personally do the pollination. After this, in our syllabus, we have to study about 2 flowers. One, which is sweet pea. Sweet pea is a flower which is pollinated by insects. So we can say it is an entemophilous flower. So in entemophilous flower, we know that since insect is the pollinating agent, the pollen grains will always try to stick to the insect, or the insect, when it comes and settles on the flower, it also would want to shed pollen grains on the stigma of the flower. But the sweet pea flower itself, the anatomy of the flower is quite unique. It has total 5 petals. It has 2 standard petals. Underneath, it has 2 winged petals, and there is 1 keel petal. So these are standard. These are wing petals, and this is the one which is known as the keel petal. Inside the keel petal, the male and the female part remains. So when an insect comes and sits on this flower, it actually folds the standard, it folds the wing and the keel, and when it does so, the pollen grains are exposed to the insect. So they attach to the surface of the insect, or if the insect is coming from another flower, it already has pollen grain attached on its underside of the body. So now it will simply shed those pollen grains on the stigma of the same flower. One thing that can happen otherwise is, since it's a bisexual flower, if cross cross-pollination is not happening, there are chances that there will be self-pollination. And you know the reason why? Because the male and the female part of the flower, they are of same height and they develop at the same time. The next example which is given in the book is that of maize. Remember one thing, maize, it is pollinated by wind. So it is also known as Anemophilous flower. And in this, the male part or the stamen of the flower, they basically hang out, they're very long and they hang out into the wind where they discharge their pollen grains, and these pollen grains are carried by wind to the female flower. One more thing, in maize there are no chances of self-pollination to happen. The reason is here the male and the female part, they do not develop at the same time. So there is no concept of homogamy. What happens is dichogamy. But under dichogamy, as we know, there are chances where it can be protandry, where the male part develops first and the female later, or protogyny. Now here in case of maize, it is protandry. That means the male flower matures before the female flower. So with this we have finished artificial pollination, different types of pollinating agents and adaptations of flower on the basis of their pollinating agents. In my next class, I'm going to start a very important topic, which is double fertilization. So keep revising and post your doubts. And yes, do not forget to share and subscribe my channel. Thank you.